Wikipedia is an open source online encyclopedia. What this means is that its articles can be edited by almost anyone. Due to this fact, many in the academic community call into question its reliability for academic research. One such person is Dr. Michael Gorman, a former president of the American Library Association. A few years back, Dr. Gorman wrote an article in which he explained his position on Wikipedia. He wrote the article for the blog of the Encyclopedia Britannica. In his article, he tells about how Larry Sanger, one of the founders of Wikipedia, had recently begun to develop a counter website that used professional experts to write articles. In his article, Dr. Gorman writes, despite Sanger's apostasy from the central tenet of the Wikipedia faith and his establishment of a resource based on expertise, the remaining faithful continue to add to, and the intellectually lazy to use, the fundamentally flawed resource, much to the chagrin of many professors and school teachers. Today, I would like to call this position of Dr. Gorman's into question. It is my contention that the fallacy of Wikipedia is not the website itself, but rather our failure to educate students on what Wikipedia is and how to properly use it. Given the proper understanding of what Wikipedia is and training on how to use it, Wikipedia, I believe, can be an invaluable resource for academic research. I would like to make this case in 4 points, and I'll get to that in a minute. But before I go any further, I want to frame this argument with an analogy. I want you to think about this. Think of a detective. When a detective is assigned a new case, he enters the crime scene with very little previous knowledge about the circumstances of the case. In the early hours of the investigation, he will receive much of his leads that point him in varying directions. Some of these leads are misdirection and altogether misinformation. But it is up to him as an intellectual to piece together what are the reliable sources, to follow those sources, and to piece together what transpired, and ultimately to provide justice. That having been said, let me point out the 4 points I want to go over in making this argument. First, I want to concede 2 points. First of all, I want to concede the point that Wikipedia, for good reason, has a circumspect reputation. Secondly, I want to concede that Wikipedia is not a great source to cite directly. I would say to any student anywhere, do not ever cite Wikipedia directly in academic work. But then I want to turn and make 2 other points. First of all, I want to make a point about how to use Wikipedia, that as a lead generator in solving and investigating your case, it is a great tool. And secondly, I want to explore and examine the reputation of Wikipedia's links. Let's begin. So I myself conducted my own survey for this project. I emailed over 100 professors across the country, selecting them as randomly as I could. Not all responded, but many did. And ultimately, I created these graphs. It was a 4-question survey. Those 4 questions make up the 4 points that we're going to go over here today. So the first question can be summarized as this. Is Wikipedia a viable source of information? Again, I said I'm going to concede this point. And if we look at the numbers, indeed, I would be well advised to do so. 36% answered in the affirmative, that it is a valuable source of information. 24% had a neutral position. There was some qualifying thing about their answer. And 40% said negative, that Wikipedia was not a valuable source of information. But again, remember, my contention is not the Wikipedia is an end-all be-all. My contention is that we need to properly understand how to use Wikipedia. The fact that its articles can be edited by nearly anyone does lead to it oftentimes being wrong and misleading. Listen to this. This is how Carleton College in Minnesota advises their students. This is pulled from their website. While Wikipedia is without question a valuable and informative resource, there is an important concern to take into account when using it. Because anyone can add or change content, there is an inherent lack of reliability and stability to Wikipedia. Authors of articles may not necessarily be experts on the topics they write about, leaving a lot of room for errors, misinformation, and bias. Let's move to the second point. The second point, again, is one that I'm going to concede, and I'm going to be very strong on this point. Wikipedia should never be cited directly. In my survey, only 20% said that of professors said that they would be all right with it if a student cited Wikipedia directly. 28% said it depends. They gave, again, some sort of qualifying answer. 52%, the majority, only slightly, but still a majority, said that it is unacceptable. I would agree with that majority. But there are some qualifying things to be said about this. In 2013, the Pew Research Foundation reported on a survey they did of thousands of AP and NWP school teachers. In it, this is one of the things they reported. They said, the survey finds that the vast majority of AP and NWP teachers use search engines, 99%, and Wikipedia, 87%, to find information online. The latter is particularly notable because both teachers and students mention in focus groups that teachers commonly bar students from using Wikipedia in their school assignments. Now, of course, the argument would be that the teachers are better equipped to understand what is reliable, dependable, and accurate as opposed to a student. But again, this is what I'm arguing. We need to begin to develop our students. We oftentimes talk about in college critical thinking skills. Part of critical thinking skills going forward will be the ability to use sources like to teach students to use sources like Wikipedia and to decipher what is worth following. Now I want to get to the meat of my argument. The third question can be summarized as, is Wikipedia a good place for students to begin research? Take a look at the findings. Only 12% said no. Another 16% said that it depends. They gave a qualifying answer. But 72% said yes, Wikipedia would be a good place to begin research. I want to read to you a couple quotes from the answers I received in the emails of this research. I want to begin with Lieutenant Colonel John E. Timmerman, a business professor at the Citadel in South Carolina. He wrote to me and said, Wikipedia is also valuable because it supplies references that may come from authoritative sources. And while it may be those sources you ultimately depend upon, you would not have gotten there or gotten there as quickly if Wikipedia had not pointed in the right direction. In fact, I have to give the credit of the analogy of the detective to Lieutenant Colonel Timmerman. It was he who said, but like any good detective, in my case, business sleuth, I would listen to any witness and evaluate any clue as part of a holistic investigation. Then, of course, I would validate my sources and question their veracity as a matter of due process. Lieutenant Colonel Timmerman is not alone in his thinking. That same Pew Research study reported this. 76% of teachers surveyed strongly agree with the notion that the internet enables students to find and use resources that would otherwise not be available to them. Now, one might argue to that point that that's saying the internet itself. But I then turn to Professor Mary Luge of the University of Maine, another participant in my survey. She said to me that students may start with a random Google search, which can lead to even wilder sources and ideas. Her point is this, that while we say the internet, a Google search can have a much broader and wilder range of potential answers, whereas Wikipedia will at least be a little more focused and head in the right direction. So let's get to the final question of the survey, and that can be summarized as this. Are the links in Wikipedia articles reputable? 16%, only 16% said that no, they were not. 24% said yes, they were. This time, the depends category comes in the largest. 60%, the large majority, said that there was something qualifying. Some were at times, many varying responses to that. But to that, I would say this. A couple assignments ago in this very class, we were assigned to do a research project. The topic was left open-ended. We can select almost anything, and I did. With this assignment in sight to ahead, I knew that I wanted to make this article. So that was one of the reasons why I picked the topic I picked. I picked a topic that I knew next to nothing about. What I spoke about in that assignment was seborrheic, an element on the periodic table of elements. I began my research on Wikipedia. I went to Wikipedia first through its links as some of my leads, and also just things that were mentioned throughout the articles. I followed those things on Google searches, YouTube searches, social network searches to find the things I was looking for. And I found many great things. I found things like Professor Ivans at the University of Manchester, who was a radiochemist, and he provided me with a great deal of details about what seborrheic was. Answered many of my questions. Now, on the handout I gave out, you can see at the bottom of it the web address to view the video on YouTube of that report if you would like to see it. So in conclusion, I want to wrap this up, and I want to turn back again to that Pew Research and look at a couple more things that they said in their findings. They said, finally, asked to place a value on various skills today's students will need in the future. Judging the quality of information tops the list, described as essential by 91% of the teachers who participated in the survey. They go on to report that 47% of these teachers strongly agree, and another 44% somewhat agree that courses or content focusing on digital literacy must be incorporated into every school's curriculum. So let's wrap this all back up by again turning to that article written by Dr. Michael Gorman. In his article, he says, intelligence is the ability to think quickly and logically, to absorb new ideas and to incorporate them into existing knowledge. Dr. Gorman and all those critics of Wikipedia, Wikipedia is the new idea. It's part of the internet, the new idea we're still trying to work out how to best use in academic research. It is up to our intellect today to come to an understanding of what Wikipedia is and how to use it. If we can do these things, we will be at a great advantage in research going forward.